how would lower body force output, or how could your legs actually impact arm health? So first and foremost, as we go throughout a season, or even as we fatigue, right? We typically start to get hit with central fatigue, which is like central nervous system fatigue, which is then gonna impact our power output. So the first thing that goes from a central nervous system standpoint is going to be the rate at which you can produce force, not necessarily the overall like volume of force or total amount of force, right? So the speed at which you can exert that force is gonna go down. So if the speed goes down, the speed at which you move down the mound is going to go down, right? And start to alter. So that can then alter your stride length, right? Especially if total force. So if you start to have peripheral fatigue as well, which is like fatigue actually in your legs, right? So now you can start to have a shortened stride. And in addition, your rate at which you are moving is going to go down as well. So now your timing is all thrown off. So what can this do? Well, ultimately, if your stride shortens, your torso has to pick up velocity, because the linear velocity that was typically used to being there for you to be timed up well with your arm is now gone. So now your torso velocity has to pick up. When your torso velocity picks up, now your arm speed into external rotation is going to have to pick up. So that's going to require a higher level of eccentric IR, or eccentric internal rotation capacity at the shoulder. If it doesn't, what ends up happening is you yank on these internal rotators way too much, and you start to beat up your shoulder. What that tends to then do is the internal rotation strength starts to drop. It'll drop because your increase in external rotation range started to happen from the fact that you now have a shortened stride. You now are starting to accelerate your torso. So now all the rotational velocities have picked up. What ends up happening is your elbow starts to get exposed because you alter how your arm is now going to come out of layback. At the end of the day, is this the only reason we start to hurt our arm? No, of course not. We can have a ton of different adaptations or maladaptations that occur in a throw, but understanding this is why, too, training in season is so imperative, right? We see guys get injured when? It's usually towards the end of a season when they start to fatigue out and they start to get exhausted. The reason they start to fatigue, or sorry, the reason they get hurt at that point is because they start to alter how much force they can actually produce from the ground if they haven't been maintaining that or training throughout the entire season. Usually the discomfort is not going to show up maybe right away at the shoulder. The bicep pain that you're talking about is a load capacity pain over time, right? So it happens over time. Why? Well, your internal rotators also do a job of stabilizing the anterior side of the shoulder, right? If the internal rotators are exhausted and weak, the bicep takes over and starts to stabilize the anterior side of the shoulder. If the bicep begins to stabilize the anterior side of the shoulder, when you're coming through and it now has to stabilize through external rotation and into acceleration piece of that, that is a lot of torque on a muscle that is not used to loading in that capacity.
That makes a lot of sense.
And especially as we get tired and we go to cast, right? Because you've altered how you're gonna come through. So your normal path would like typically be in this range, right? But because you're tired and you're accelerating the torso, don't forget that you've now altered your torso mechanics. So you need to pick up speed in torso rotation, right? In order to pick up speed, when we have guys that do this, so they rotate just similarly in this plane and they land with sort of like a arm slot somewhere out in this general range, right? In order to pick up speed, what a lot of guys will do is they'll take a very uniplanar or dual plane rotation capacity into a triplane rotational capacity all of a sudden, except their shoulder and arm won't be able to match that plane anymore. So they'll literally get off plane like this. So you'll see a massive tilt start to happen with an arm slot drop. What looks like an arm slot drop, it's just really the same arm slot. They just haven't equated back up because they're not strong enough or used to doing that in that plane. These are how you can get all these issues. And like, so we'll get guys that'll come in, right? We just had a guy, he came in, he's been playing all summer. You know, he gives me the old classic excuse, well, I've been, you know, staying in an Airbnb, or I'm staying at these bullshit hotels, or I'm doing X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, all right, well, if you're doing that, you clearly have the resources to get to a gym somewhere. I mean, Planet Fitnesses are still 10 bucks if you're a guest. You can find a gym somewhere to train, but he came in and he's like, yo, I need to work on my arm path because like, I just feel like I'm casting out. So my first question to him was like, well, did you come in and jump on the force plates? As soon as he jumped on the force plates, we could see right away, all peak power was down. So central fatigue is high in him right now. And then his overall force production was trending down. So now we understand that peripheral fatigue is down. It isn't an arm path issue that we need to train. What's actually going on is we just have a force production issue from the lower half, and it has completely altered how he's coming through with his arm. What's really dangerous, he hasn't dropped in velo. So that's actually really dangerous. But if we had a requisite drop in velo due to the fact that we have a force production issue here, you'd know he's probably staying in sync. But because he's not, you know that he's accelerating differently from somewhere to create that energy out the arm. So everything we do is a compensatory action. For a pitching on a mound, you're making a collection of compensatory actions for throwing, right? Your typical throwing pattern is done on flat ground, right? That's how you learned how to throw an object. Now you're taking it to a slope. Why is it way easier to do a shuffle throw and throw hard than it is to start from a standstill and throw? Because this is a compensatory action to the fact that I have to alter what I do based on rules of a game, and I have to alter what I do because I'm now throwing on a slope, right? As opposed to just throwing on a flat ground. So you have all these things going on, and what happens is when I get tired, I lose strength or force output, and by nature of losing strength and force output, my compensations that I normally make can't occur.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. Why do we sit here and pay too much attention to our flat ground? Like,
I don't think we throw on a mound enough. I will always say that. I think guys are afraid to throw on a mound. I think the primary reason people shy away from the mound is because they can't help but raise their intensity when they get on a mound. It's just like human nature. You get on a mound, you want to throw harder. Even if you think you're throwing 70% on flat ground, then you get to a mound, you're probably throwing closer to 80, 85% on a mound because you're just feeling the slope, you feel good, you want to show off, you want to do what's up. So a lot of times what we'll do is you'll see we'll move guys up on the mound. So we'll move the catcher way up. The reason is now I'm playing on your empathy, meaning you don't want to throw something really hard at this guy that's only 50 feet away. You feel bad. Right. So you'll scale back naturally by doing that. And that's why we do a short box. It has nothing to do with the fact that like I think throwing 50 feet is good. I don't. I think if anything, that's going to alter it, but at least it's going to force you to keep your intensity down.
It's a mind fuck.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. It's the whole reason we do it. Yeah, I don't think there's any other actual benefit to it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.